Christmas has always carried a strange weight in my life. For most people, it's a season of warmth, twinkling lights, and shared laughter around a crowded table. For me, Christmas is a mirror, one that reflects not joy, but the cracks in my family, the way love can turn conditional, and how the people you should be able to trust most are sometimes the ones holding the knife. My name is Sofia Martinez, and I'm 31 years old. If you ask my family who I am, they'll tell you I'm the disappointment, the one who never quite measured up, the sister who somehow turned out wrong, while my brother Carlos was the shining star. I can still hear the way my mother used to introduce us at gatherings. This is Carlos, my brilliant boy, my pride. And then after a pause, and this is Sophia. No glowing words, no pride. Just my name, flat as the leftover turkey that no one wanted to eat. I grew up in the shadow of my brother's golden halo. Carlos was the one with the scholarships, the big personality, the easy charm that made adults light up when he entered a room. I was quieter, more reserved, more interested in books and codes on a computer screen than in sports or parties. My teachers saw potential, but at home my parents only saw contrast. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" was the soundtrack of my teenage years, a refrain that still haunts me in the quiet moments. By the time I turned 18, I realized I could never compete for their approval in the same arena Carlos dominated. So I carved my own path. I studied computer science not with their support, but in spite of their indifference. I worked nights, cleaned offices, wrote code until my fingers cramped, anything to pay tuition and keep my dream alive. And though I struggled, I never told them the truth of how hard it was, because I knew deep down they didn't want to hear it. To them, I was already the failure. That belief hardened into cruelty over the years. Every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every family gathering, it was the same. Carlos sitting at the head of the table telling stories of his success, my parents hanging on every word. Me sitting off to the side, enduring their backhanded remarks, the constant reminders that I hadn't settled down, that I hadn't built anything meaningful. They never asked about my work, never cared that I was running projects worth millions, that I had quietly built a cybersecurity startup that was growing faster than I had ever dreamed. To them, I was still just Sophia. Forgettable, replaceable. I let them think that. For years I let them mock me, diminish me, dismiss me. Because what they didn't know, what I kept locked away like a secret treasure, was that my company wasn't just surviving. It was thriving. Contracts with government agencies, private firms, banks. I was securing digital empires, while they treated me like I couldn't secure my own future. I built something that gave me freedom, power, and independence. But I never told them, because I wanted to see just once if they could love me without a price tag attached. That brings me to last Christmas. The house was dressed for the season, every corner dripping with garlands and lights. My mother had outdone herself with the decorations, as if the glitter could mask the bitterness underneath. The smell of roast pork and cinnamon filled the air. Laughter echoed from the dining room where relatives gathered, their voices a chorus of holiday cheer that felt painfully foreign to me. I arrived with a bottle of wine, wearing a simple red dress. As soon as I stepped through the door, I felt the shift. My mother's smile faltered for half a second before she plastered it back on. My father kissed my cheek distractedly. Carlos swept in, clapping me on the shoulder like he was the benevolent king greeting a servant. "Sophia," he said, drawing out my name like it was a joke, only he understood. "Glad you could make it." I forced a smile, swallowing the knot in my throat. I knew how the night would go. It always went the same. Dinner was a feast, the table groaning under the weight of dishes. My mother fussed over Carlos's plate, piling it high, while barely acknowledging mine. My father raised a glass in a toast, his eyes shining. To Carlos for closing another big deal this year. We couldn't be prouder. The family clapped, glasses clinking. My name was never mentioned. I sat quietly, pushing food around my plate, pretending the indifference didn't sting. I told myself, as I always did, that I didn't need their recognition, that I had carved a life outside of their small world. But that night, something felt different. Heavier. Halfway through the meal, Carlos cleared his throat, tapping his glass for attention. The room hushed, all eyes turning to him. He stood, his smile wide, his posture dripping with authority. I have an announcement, he said, his voice booming. As you all know, I've been making big moves this year, and part of that involves some changes in the family. He looked directly at me and my stomach dropped. Sophia, he said, his tone falsely sympathetic. It's time you pack your bags. This house, it isn't yours anymore. The words hung in the air like a guillotine. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Conversations broke into whispers. My mother looked away. My father avoided my eyes. And Carlos stood there smirking, as if he had just done something noble. What are you talking about? I managed to ask, my voice trembling. Carlos raised his glass, savoring the drama. This house is mine now. I've taken over the mortgage. You've been living here like a guest, Sophia, but the truth is you don't belong here anymore. It's time you moved on. The room erupted in murmurs, some sympathetic, some amused. My aunt shook her head, muttering something about poor Sophia. My cousins exchanged smug glances. And me, I sat frozen, my heart pounding, the humiliation burning through me like fire. I looked at my mother, searching for support, but she only sighed. It's for the best, Sophia. You need to stand on your own 2 feet. The irony of her words nearly broke me. I had been standing on my own 2 feet for years. Hell, I had built an empire on them. And yet here they were, stripping me of the one place I thought I still had. I wanted to scream, to reveal the truth then and there. To tell them that without me, this house wouldn't even exist. That when foreclosure loomed years ago, I had stepped in quietly, secretly paying off debts they never knew about, ensuring they never lost their precious home. I wanted to tell them that the roof over their heads was because of me, but I stayed silent. Because something inside me knew this wasn't the moment to blurt out the truth in rage. No, if they were going to see me really see me, it had to be deliberate. It had to be undeniable. So I sat there, my face calm, though my insides burned, and I nodded. If that's what you think, Carlos. His smirk widened, mistaking my silence for defeat. But deep inside a storm was gathering, and this time I wasn't going to let it pass. The rest of that dinner blurred like a fever dream. My fork clinked against the plate, but I couldn't taste the food. Laughter erupted around me, though none of it sounded real. Every smile on my relatives' faces looked twisted, like masks hiding something uglier. Carlos basked in the attention, weaving stories of his successes, his voice rising above the chatter, like he was the only one who mattered. And maybe in their eyes he was. I sat there quietly, the humiliation simmering just beneath my skin. It wasn't just his words that cut me. It was the way everyone else absorbed them without question. My mother nodded approvingly. My father muttered something about responsibility and manhood. Even my cousins chimed in, making jokes at my expense, as if Carlos's declaration had given them permission to pile on. Inside, I wanted to scream, if only you knew. But I stayed silent, chewing slowly, forcing myself to breathe. Because what no one at that table knew, what no one had ever cared to ask, was that without me, that house wouldn't even exist. I remembered the night 4 years ago when I got the call from the bank. My parents were months behind on the mortgage foreclosure, just weeks away. Carlos was too busy chasing his investments and luxury lifestyle to care. My mother called me sobbing, not asking, but hinting, desperate. We might lose the house, Sophia. It's such a shame after all these years. I remember holding the phone, staring at the numbers in my bank account, knowing what it would cost me. And I did it. Quietly. Without fanfare. I wired the money, covered the arrears, and arranged future payments so they wouldn't have to worry. I saved their home, the place I grew up, the place they loved more than me. And I never told them. Because I didn't do it for their praise. I did it because for all their cruelty, it was still my family. Now sitting at that Christmas table, hearing Carlos claim ownership, it took everything in me not to laugh bitterly. Yours, I wanted to spit the word across the table. You wouldn't even have a house if I hadn't stepped in when you were too selfish to lift a finger. But instead, I let the silence hang. Because silence is powerful. It lets people believe they've won. It makes them lower their guard, and I needed that. After dinner, I excused myself and slipped into the cold night air. Snow had begun to fall, each flake illuminated by the glow of the porch light. I wrapped my coat tighter around me, leaning against the railing, my breath fogging the air. For a moment, I let myself feel it, the hurt, the betrayal, the sharp sting of rejection from the people who should have loved me most. But underneath the pain was something else, a steady pulse, a simmering fire that had kept me alive all these years. The same fire that had driven me to work nights while studying, that had fueled every line of code I wrote, every deal I negotiated, every risk I took to build my company. That fire had never gone out. And tonight, Carlos had thrown gasoline on it. The sliding door opened behind me, and Lily, my cousin, stepped out. She was always one of the more observant ones, though she rarely spoke in my defense. "Sophia," she said softly, almost apologetically. I I didn't know he was going to say that. I forced a smile. "Of course you didn't." She hesitated, then added, "But maybe he's right. Maybe it's time you moved on, built a life of your own." I turned to her slowly, my voice calm but sharp. "You think I haven't built a life? You think I've been sitting around waiting for permission? You don't know the first thing about me." Her cheeks flushed and she looked away. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant," I cut in gently but firmly. "You see me the way they see me, small, dependent, forgettable. But one day you'll realize how wrong you've been." She blinked, surprised by the conviction in my tone. For once, I didn't back down. She muttered something about needing to check on the kids and hurried back inside, leaving me alone with the snow and my thoughts. Later that night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom. The walls were still covered in faded posters from when I was a teenager, remnants of a girl who had once dreamed of something bigger. I traced the outlines with my eyes, remembering the hours I spent here writing code, drawing plans, scribbling ideas no one believed in. This room had been my prison and my sanctuary, and now they wanted to rip even this away. I stared at the ceiling, my chest heavy, but then I thought of my company, of the servers humming in data centers across the country protecting systems from hackers, of the employees who trusted me to lead them, who respected me not because of my last name, but because of what I had built, of the contracts sitting on my desk worth millions waiting for my signature. I wasn't powerless. I had never been powerless. I just let them think I was. And maybe it was time to stop. The next morning, I left early before anyone else was awake. I drove back to my apartment in the city, the skyline rising in the distance like a promise. As I pulled into the garage, my phone buzzed. A message from Carlos. "Don't forget what I said. You've got until the end of the month to move out." I stared at the words, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. End of the month. He thought he was giving me a deadline, but really he had given me an opening. I opened my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I pulled up the documents I had kept tucked away for years. The deed, the payment records, the proof that the house wasn't his to claim it was mine, bought and paid for with my sacrifice. For a long time I had kept those papers hidden, thinking there would never be a need to reveal them. But now I saw it clearly. Carlos wanted a war, and for once I wasn't going to walk away. The truth was like a blade, sharp and undeniable, and soon they would all feel its edge. The week between Christmas and New Year's was always strange, quiet, reflective, full of promises that rarely lasted past January. But that year for me, it was a time of planning, of sharpening, of finally deciding that silence had cost me too much already. I spent hours in my office, documents spread out across the mahogany desk I had once bought secondhand, now polished to a shine. The deed lay at the center, the original ownership papers that carried my name, not Carlos's. Receipts from the bank, wire transfers, every payment I had made to keep the house afloat, they were all there. Proof that could not be denied. As I stared at those papers, memories resurfaced of the nights I had worked until dawn. My eyes burning from blue light, my body aching from exhaustion. Every dollar I poured into that house was a dollar I could have spent on myself, on vacations, on luxuries my colleagues enjoyed. But I didn't. I chose to save the home my parents loved, the one place I thought they would always protect. And now Carlos stood there, puffed up with arrogance, trying to take credit for what he never touched. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about years of humiliation, years of being the afterthought. Every remark my mother had made. "Why can't you be more like Carlos?" echoed in my mind. Every time my father raised a glass for him, but not for me, burned like acid in my chest. Even Lily's condescending suggestion that I build a life of my own lingered. They had all written me off, and I had let them. Not anymore. By midweek I had decided how it would happen. No quiet reveal in a lawyer's office, no cold mailing of documents. This was a family built on performance, on appearances, on pride, paraded at dinner tables. If the truth was going to come out, it would come out there where they feasted, where they laughed, where they believed they held all the power. New Year's dinner. That would be the stage. In the meantime, I kept my distance. I ignored Carlos's texts demanding updates about when I planned to leave. I let my mother's voicemails pile up, each one a variation of disappointment. You're causing trouble, Sophia. Don't make this harder than it has to be. My father didn't call at all. His silence was its own betrayal. But Daniel called. Not the Daniel from the last story of mine, but my Daniel, a colleague, who had grown into something more over the years. He had been with me from the early days of my company, one of the first people to believe in my vision. He knew everything, every sacrifice, every secret. You can't keep letting them walk over you, he told me one night as we sat in my office, the city lights glowing behind us. I know, I admitted. But it's not just about me anymore. It's about showing them who I am. For once, I want them to see me without twisting it, without diminishing it. He leaned forward, his eyes steady on mine. Then don't hold back. You have the proof. You have the power. Use it. His faith in me steadied my resolve. Because he was right. I had spent too long shrinking so they wouldn't feel small. It was time to stand at my full height. When New Year's Eve arrived, the house was alive again, with lights and music. Relatives poured in carrying bottles of champagne and trays of desserts. The air buzzed with anticipation of midnight of new beginnings, though for me the beginning had already arrived the moment I decided to stop hiding. I entered wearing a black dress, simple but striking, my hair pinned back, my shoulders squared. I carried nothing with me but a folder tucked beneath my arm, the deed, the receipts, the truth. The moment I walked in, I felt the eyes. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. My father gave a curt nod. Carlos smirked, already glowing from wine and self-satisfaction. "Well, look who decided to join us," he announced loudly, as though my presence were some kind of comedy. I said nothing, just took my seat. The night unfolded predictably at first, Carlos boasting about his new car, my parents fawning, my cousins chiming in with laughter. I sat quietly, letting their words wash over me, each one fueling the fire building in my chest. Finally, as dessert was served and glasses were filled for the midnight toast, Carlos stood again, tapping his glass for attention. "Before we ring in the new year," he declared, "I'd like to make an announcement. As you all know, changes are coming. And one of those changes is that my dear sister Sophia will be moving out. It's time she found her own way in life." The room chuckled approvingly. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin as if this were some noble act. My father raised his glass again, and Carlos grinned at me, daring me to protest. I rose slowly, the folder clutched in my hand. My chair scraped against the hardwood, silencing the room. Every eye turned toward me, some amused, some expectant, none prepared. "I think it's time," I said, my voice steady, "that I told you all a story." Carlos snorted. "This should be good." I ignored him. 4 years ago, this house was weeks away from foreclosure. The bank was ready to take it. My parents didn't tell most of you that. They kept it quiet, too ashamed. But I got the call, and I made the payments. Every single one. Murmurs rippled through the room. Faces turned toward my parents, who shifted uncomfortably. I opened the folder, pulling out the first document. Here's the deed. Look closely. It doesn't say Carlos Martinez. It says Sofia Martinez, my name, not his. Gasps. My aunt clapped a hand to her mouth. My cousins leaned forward, eyes wide. Carlos's smirk faltered. "That's a lie. You faked that." I pulled out the receipts, next spreading them across the table like a dealer revealing a winning hand. Wire transfers. Bank statements. Every payment I made to save this house while you were busy bragging about your so-called deals. The room erupted in whispers, the weight of the truth too heavy to contain. I looked at my parent, my voice trembling but strong. "I saved your home. I kept a roof over your heads. And all this time you let Carlos parade around as if he was the one carrying the family. You let him belittle me, mock me, call me a guest in the house that I paid for." My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father's jaw worked soundlessly. Carlos's face flushed crimson, his hands clenched into fists. "You think I'm the disappointment?" I continued, my chest heaving with years of swallowed words finally set free. "But while you were busy measuring me against Carlos, I built something real. I built a company that protects banks, governments, entire nations. I built a life without your approval. And I saved you even when you never once believed in me. The silence that followed was deafening. Every face was frozen, every breath held. And for the first time in my life, I felt taller than all of them. The silence in the dining room after my words felt alive, humming like the air before a storm. I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the clink of a spoon dropped into a dessert plate, the sharp inhale of someone realizing the story they had believed their whole lives was collapsing right in front of them. Carlos was the first to break. He slammed his glass down so hard that wine splashed across the tablecloth. "You're lying," he shouted, his face red, his voice trembling with fury. "You're jealous of me, and now you're trying to steal my moment. You're nothing, Sophia. You've always been nothing." But his words no longer cut the way they once had. The truth had already sliced through his illusion, and everyone knew it. I straightened, holding the deed high enough for all to see. Nothing doesn't save a house from foreclosure. Nothing doesn't build a company worth more than you'll ever touch in your lifetime. Look at the papers, Carlos. This house is mine. Always has been. Gasps rippled through the relatives. My aunt whispered, "Dios mío." My cousins exchanged wide-eyed glances. My mother's face had gone pale, her hands trembling as she gripped her napkin. My father's jaw was tight, but his eyes darted to the documents with something dangerously close to guilt. Carlos lunged forward, snatching at the papers, but I pulled them back before his fingers could touch them. "You don't get to rewrite this story," I snapped. "Not anymore." He sneered, his voice cracking with desperation. "You think money makes you better than me? You think owning some company makes you more important than family?" I laughed, the sound bitter. "Family. You stood in front of everyone and told me to pack my bags. You wanted me out of the house, I paid for the house, I kept standing when you were too busy chasing your ego. Don't talk to me about family when you've treated me like a stain on yours." The words landed heavy, their truth undeniable. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but I could see it wasn't pride or sorrow, it was fear. Fear of losing the story she'd told herself for years. She pressed a trembling hand to her lips. "Sophia, why didn't you tell us?" The question hung there, absurd in its simplicity. I stared at her, decades of hurt boiling over. "Because you never wanted to know. You never asked about my life. You only ever asked why I wasn't like Carlos. You called me a failure before I even had a chance to prove myself. And when I did, when I built something incredible, I stayed silent because I wanted to see if you could love me without conditions, and you couldn't." My father shifted uncomfortably, his deep voice rumbling low. "Sophia, this isn't the place. We should talk about this privately." My chest tightened, but my voice rose stronger. "No, not privately. You were happy to humiliate me in public, to let Carlos announce to everyone that I was being thrown out like garbage. So now in front of everyone, you're going to hear the truth. You don't get to tuck me back into the shadows anymore." Carlos opened his mouth again, but this time it was Lily who spoke up. She had been quiet until now, her eyes flicking nervously between us. "Wait. So all those years when we thought Carlos was helping with the house, it was you? You saved it?" I turned to her, my throat tight but my voice steady. "Yes. Every payment. Every sacrifice. And I didn't ask for thanks. I just wanted peace. But instead of peace, I got ridicule. Instead of gratitude, I got mockery." A murmur rose from the guests, the truth settling into the air like smoke no one could clear. Carlos looked around wildly, searching for support, but the faces that once beamed at him were clouded with doubt now. "I don't believe this," he spat, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She's manipulating all of you. She's always been jealous. Don't let her fool you." But no one moved to defend him. My mother's shoulders sagged as if years of denial were crashing down all at once. My father leaned back heavily in his chair, his silence more damning than words. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. The truth didn't need them to believe it. It existed regardless. It had weight, evidence, proof. For years, I had begged silently for their validation. But standing there now, I understood I didn't need it anymore. Still, I looked at them, my parents, my brother, my relatives, and I let myself say the words I had carried for so long. "You called me the disappointment. You let him mock me, tear me down, tell me I was nothing. But look at me now. I am not your failure. I am not your shame. I am the one who saved you when you didn't even know you needed saving. The room was silent, but not empty. It was full of something heavy, something final, a reckoning. Carlos slumped into his chair, his chest heaving, the fight draining from him as the weight of reality pressed down. My mother wept quietly, dabbing her eyes with the corner of her napkin. My father's eyes met mine for the first time all evening, and in them I saw not pride, but regret, too little too late. I gathered my papers, tucking them back into the folder. My hands were steady now, my heart pounding not with fear, but with release. I had carried this truth alone for so long, and finally it was no longer mine to bear alone. I'll be leaving now, I said softly, though my words carried through the room. Not because you told me to, but because I choose to. This house, this family, you tried to make me feel like I didn't belong. But I know who I am now. And I don't need your approval to live my life. I turned toward the door, the folder tucked under my arm like a shield. Daniel, who had been waiting quietly outside with his ever-watchful patience, met me there, his eyes warm with pride. He didn't need words to tell me what he thought. His smile was enough. Behind me I could hear the muffled sounds of chaos, my mother crying, Carlos protesting, my father trying to regain control. But I didn't look back. For once in my life I didn't need to. The cold night air hit me like a baptism as I stepped outside. Snowflakes drifted gently, settling in my hair, melting on my cheeks. The sky was vast, endless, open, and for the first time in years I felt the same. The days after New Year's passed in a blur, but not because I was lost or confused, because for the first time in my life I felt clarity. I woke up in my city apartment with sunlight streaming through the blinds, my laptop humming softly from the night before, and an almost startling sense of peace settled in my chest. The storm had come and gone, and though it left wreckage behind, it had also carved space for something new: freedom. My phone buzzed constantly, with missed calls and messages. My mother's voice filled my voicemail, shifting from pleading to scolding to begging again. Sophia, we didn't know. Sophia, you've embarrassed us. Sophia, please come back so we can talk. My father finally wrote a short email. We underestimated you. Let's discuss this as a family. And Carlos? Carlos sent nothing at first. Days later, a text appeared. You didn't have to humiliate me like that. I stared at it for a long time, then closed it without replying. Because the truth was, I hadn't humiliated him. He had done that to himself every time he mocked me, every time he stood on my shoulders while pretending I was beneath him. All I had done was reveal what was always there. But there was a message that did matter. Daniel sent me a simple one the next morning: I've never been prouder of you. Those words, unadorned and honest, meant more than every empty toast my father had ever raised, more than every backhanded compliment my mother had ever given. Because they came from someone who saw me, not the version of me my family invented, but me whole and real. In the weeks that followed, I poured myself into my company with renewed fire. Every meeting, every deal, every late-night call with clients felt different now, lighter. As if I had shed a weight I didn't even realize I was carrying. For years, part of me had been working not just to build something great, but to prove myself to the people who refused to see me. Now I no longer needed their recognition to measure my worth. My work was for me, for the people I led, for the vision I believed in. Yet the memories lingered. Sometimes I'd find myself staring at the deeds still tucked safely in my folder, and I'd feel a pang of grief. Not grief for the house, or even for the years of silence, but for the family I had always wished for, and never had. A family that celebrated me simply for existing, not for what I could give them. That was the wound beneath all the others, the longing to be loved without conditions. One evening, weeks later, Carlos showed up at my office unannounced. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders slumped, the arrogance drained from his face. I almost didn't let him in, but something in his eyes stopped me. He sat across from me, fumbling with his hands. I was wrong, he said finally, his voice low. All those years I thought you were beneath me. I thought I was protecting the family's pride by putting you down. But the truth is, I was jealous. You had something I didn't drive, vision, and I hated you for it. His words stung, but they also rang with honesty. For the first time, I saw not the golden boy who had overshadowed me, but a man wrestling with his own failures. I don't know if I can ever fix what I did, he continued, but I don't want to lose you completely. You're my sister, and I don't want the last words we ever share to be the ones we screamed across that table. I let his words hang between us, my heart a battlefield of old scars and new possibilities. Forgiveness is never simple. It doesn't erase the past, and it doesn't heal wounds overnight. But it can open a door, even just a crack. I don't need you to worship me, Carlos, I said softly. I just need you to stop tearing me down. If you can do that, maybe we can start again. He nodded, his eyes wet. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was something, a beginning. I never went back to live in that house. It was mine on paper, but in truth, it was never really home anymore. Too many memories haunted those walls. Instead, I donated it, quietly, to a foundation that turned it into a shelter for women and children escaping abuse. When I signed the final papers, I felt something loosen in my chest, as if the house itself had finally stopped being a burden and become a gift. A legacy of sorts, but one of my choosing. And that's the thing I learned through all of this: home isn't the place you're told you belong. It's the place you choose for yourself. Family isn't the people who share your blood, but the ones who see you, truly see you, and choose you again and again. For years, I thought I had to earn love by shrinking, by sacrificing, by hiding. But now I know the truth. Real love doesn't demand that you disappear. It celebrates when you take up space. So if you're listening to my story, maybe you know what it feels like to be underestimated, to be called a disappointment, to be told you don't belong. Maybe you've been carrying their voices inside your head, convincing yourself you're small. But hear me now, you are not their disappointment. You are not their shame. You are the fire they couldn't put out, the truth they couldn't erase. And sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's proving to yourself that you were right all along. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own worth, do me one favor: like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story. And please leave a comment below. Tell me about the moment you chose to stand tall, the moment you realized you didn't need their approval to be enough. Because you are enough, you always were.